Tragedy in life normally comes with betrayal and compromise, and trading in your integrity and not having dignity in life. That's really where failure comes. After our time in the yard had come to a close, both Cheapshot and I entered our cell without a word. I'd been disappointed that there were no sprite bots in range the whole time we were outside. Then again, it was always going to be a slim chance, and there was always tomorrow. Once every pony had settled in, the guards chose their victim for the day. A mangy, red-headed mare was dragged off to the infirmary. As I stayed in the back of the cell, I cringed at the thought of what would happen to her. At the very least, Cheapshot helped by speaking up. "Well, it wasn't the most productive of days, but I managed to get you an audience for tomorrow." He sighed as he leaned up against the wall. "Though, just my opinion here, I wouldn't trust a single one of them further than I could throw them." "Well, as it stands, throwing them might just be our best option of getting out of here," I grumbled. "The fences are too well guarded. We'd never make it more than 100 yards. I leaned my head back and tipped it against the cold concrete wall. Without knowing where the building's layout is weakest, I'm not sure we can break out." "Fuck off." Cheapshot spat as he pushed himself off the wall and walked over to me. "I ain't going around making friends, so you can just fucking call it quits." He angrily slammed his hoof against the wall above me. "Do you hear me?" He put his hoof under my chin and forced my vision up. It was one step too far in my book. In return, I hit him where it counted. It wasn't more than a startled reflex, and I had no real want to hurt him, but it felt good all the same. As he crumpled to the floor with a whimper, I stood up and hung over him. "I couldn't give a single, solitary fuck what you think." I gave him a swift kick to the side, receiving another whimper. "If, and that's a big if, I find a way out, then I'm allowing you to come. You don't have the right to come, and you only have the privilege so long as you're useful." I stepped back and sat myself in a corner. "And if you touch me like that again, I won't just hit you. I'll make damn sure those mares whose rears you fancy have something in common with you." "Sure." Cheapshot coughed out as he slowly pulled himself into the corner opposite mine. He looked to me, and even though through his pain, he gave me the most devilish grin. "Whatever you say, boss." "And don't call me that," I grumbled. "Just make sure you're ready for dinner. I don't want another incident like last night." As I finished, he put his hoof up and opened his muzzle to retort. I cut him off. "Not again. Is that clear?" He nodded. I sat back and closed my eyes, hopeful to get a nap in before we were ushered off again. Yesterday was still fresh in my mind, and I didn't want to live through that again. Still, the question of how we were going to get out weighed heavily on my mind. I meant what I said. I'm not even sure if we could escape. The elements told me that I needed to remain hopeful for my friends, so I refused to give up. "Vanilla." Cheapshot spoke up. He let out a grunt as he propped himself up against the wall. "She was my deal." "What?" His question caught me off guard, but I put the subject together in my mind. "Oh, I see. Is she someone you cared for?" "She was." He shook his head. "She was my best friend in the world. Sure, Jackhammer and Sledge were my friends as well, but Vanilla's the one I regret the most." He paused and looked up to me. He let out a little chuckle and scratched at his mane. "Sorry. Some context might help. Vanilla and I met a few years back when she fled her Steel Rangers contingent up north. She was looking for work, and I was looking for fun. So we helped each other out. Ended up building ourselves the meanest little gang this side of Baltimore. We didn't stay small for long. Recruited Jackhammer and his ponies next. Followed quickly by Sledge. All in all, we had 80 ponies between us, and a nice protection contract with the outer settlements of Baltimore." He paused as he took a deep breath. "Then he showed up with his army. It was almost overnight that we were taken by surprise. We tried to fight, but in the end we just couldn't win. I gave a small nod. I understand. I watched Chasm fall, and then the next day was Dodge. The image of the young colt exploding flashed through my mind. I did what I could to push the thoughts and feelings away. There wasn't anything I could do, I whispered. When Jack went down, Sledge offered to surrender. I tried to get Vanilla to agree, but she just kept fighting. Sheepshot continued his story. What surprised us was that evil asshole gave us a choice. One life will be spared among you, was what he'd said. Sheepshot dropped his vision to the floor, as a thought 1,000-yard stare consumed his eyes. I don't know what came over me. I simply cried out, I want to live. He paused. Vanilla and Sledge didn't even have the time to object before his ponies tore them to pieces. He sniffled as a tear ran down his cheek. My reward was to be locked away in here. This ain't what they paid their lives for. This ain't living. So, you sold them out to save yourself? I snorted. Pathetic. You don't think I know that? Sheepshot snapped. Every night I sleep, I see them looking at me. Vanilla with her judgmental eyes before they tore her apart. He wiped his cheek and looked up to me. That's why I have to get out of here. I can't take back what I've done, but at the very least I can try to avenge her. Well, trying to force me to find a way out faster isn't going to fucking help. I shot back at him. I've lost ponies I care for as well, but I didn't betray them. I paused. Didn't I, though? I had brought this down upon them. You'll just have to trust me. I'll find a way. As the hours passed, I couldn't get any sleep. Dinner went without incident, even though I could only keep half of the meat down. The rest of the night between Sheepshot and I was spent in silence. It wasn't until halfway through the night that I'd been woken by him whimpering in his sleep. The idea that he had to live through what had happened both again filled me with anger and sorrow. He got what he deserved for abandoning his friends. The fact that he was plagued by it showed just how little Dodge had affected me. As I laid back down to sleep, I hoped that even if it was horrible, I could watch it happen again. I needed to see Pallet die again. I wanted to be there in penance that I paid for my actions. However, my mind wouldn't relent as I fell into a dreamless sleep. The bell for breakfast woke me up. Even though it was only a few hours, a good sleep did wonders for how much I hurt. I could walk on my own now without it hurting so bad I collapsed. Still, I knew I was a mess under these bandages, and it still hurt more than any normal injury I'd ever had. Even the broken leg in Pie's facility hurt less than this. Today, I was able to finish the small slice of meat they'd given me to eat. Sheepshot, on the other hoof, didn't seem to be in the mood to eat. He'd spent the walk up here and the entire time we had to eat just staring at the floor. Bringing up everything that he had yesterday, it must have really torn at him inside. It didn't help with the comments that I'd made either. Subtlety's never been my thing, but at that point I should have held my tongue. All right, ponies, one of the abominations shouted. Mandatory outside time begins now. The half-mare, half-monster croaked in cracked a whip and scanned her eyes across the room. Form a line and march. She snarled. Are you ready, Sheepshot? I asked. We both stood up, but he didn't seem to register what I'd even said his name. Look, I need you to snap out of it. I whispered and put my hoof around his neck, like I was still hurt. That seemed to pull him out of his thoughts. He looked over to me with a confused expression, but I was quick to correct that. I need you to get any pony else you can to agree before our time outside is half over. I walked and guided us into the slowly shifting line. Can you do that? Yeah. He stuttered and came out of his daze. Sure. I'll find you some more. He gave a weak smile and took up some of the work in helping me walk. We made our way out into the yard, and once again I walked over to where I was at the spot near the fence yesterday. Again, the guards eyed at me, but I didn't do anything other than watch. Once Sheepshot left, and I took a few minutes to be sure I was out of the guard's mind, I lifted my pip-buck to my muzzle. "Pie, are you there?" I whispered. As the pip-buck's display shifted to pink, I didn't even wait for her to pop up into my vision. "Please tell me you found a spry bot." "Nopey, nopey," she exclaimed in a voice too cheerful for that news. It had been a good idea to leave her volume down as well, or she definitely would have attracted attention. "I've been monitoring it every second since you told me to." She paused and scrunched up her muzzle. "You might not like it, but—" "Pie?" I cut her off. "I'm not going back up to that room." An electric jolt of fear ran along my spine as I thought about it. "There has to be another way. Can you find a way to boost the signal on the pip-buck?" "The pip-buck's radio signal can be picked up from 100 miles away if the signal is strong enough." Powder retorted in a matter-of-factly way. Spybot network was only designed to interact with terminals in towns and cities. The radio components were never designed to broadcast more than a few hundred feet. I see. I'm not going to lie. It had been one piece of news that I was looking forward to. Well, without those schematics, I'm not sure how I'll find a way out. The plan so far kind of depends on what details are hidden in plain sight. I let out a sigh. Still, I can't lose hope. There has to be another way. "Miss Hope?" A voice spoke up from behind me. I spun around to see one of the Ash sisters approaching me. "Some of the others say that it is crazy to work with you, yet you sit alone, talking to yourself." She raised an eyebrow and sat down in front of me. "Maybe we are not the crazy ones. It's just how I work out my plans." I fumed to form an answer. Then again, with everything that's been going on, I'm not sure if I hadn't become a bit crazy. "Is there anything you need, Miss?" "My name's Rosina Ash." She cleared her throat and held out a hoof to me. I merely stared at it until she lowered it. "My sister, Mora, is whom I came here to discuss." She took a moment to straighten herself out before continuing. "She seems to have taken an interest in you." For a moment I wasn't sure what she was referring to. Then the thought of her wink at me yesterday came to mind. I knew I was blushing, but I hadn't even thought about something like that in a long while. When I did, I made my pip-buck display flicker before she placed some text on it. "Storm and Mora sitting in a tree." "Is there an issue with that?" I replied quickly. "I came to ask you to not encourage her." She replied with almost a scowl. "My sister doesn't need thoughts of mares running through her head, or the temptation to lay with them." She spat on the dirt at my hooves. "I ask that you keep your focus on the task before us." "Not a problem. I'll be perfectly focused," I replied. She relaxed a bit at that, but I wasn't finished. "However, you have no right to tell her who, or me, who they can be with. Yeah, I won't make any advances, but how can you stand there and condemn her for her choice when she could be dead tomorrow?" "Because it's disgusting." She snarled and got to her hooves. "If you so much as look at her that way again, I will personally tear your eyes from your skull." "You're welcome to try," I growled, standing up as straight as I could. "I hope everything's all right over here, ladies," Cheapshot called out as he walked over. Both Rosina and I stood still, just glaring at each other. I broke my glare first, turning to meet a whole group of ponies as he approached. "Just fine," I grumbled and ground my forehooves onto the ground. "Is this every pony?" I looked about the group. Jackknife and the other stallion who had met yesterday stood off to Cheapshot's right. I couldn't remember his name, but he was practically a skeleton with how gaunt he looked. My eyes drifted over to his other side, where I found Mora staring at me with a smile. I forced myself to ignore her and move on to the other ponies I'd met. Mary Days gave me her cutest little smile. It had been years since I'd seen her, but even after that killing joke trapped her as a filly, That murderous mare still pulled in as many contracts as I did. Beside her was a very proper-looking ghoul unicorn. The mare's ragged and dirty green pre-war dress stood out against her dirty tan coat. She looked utterly bored with herself, floating a cigarette up and taking a drag before breathing out a light plume of pink cloud. I knew she was going to be trouble to keep in line. Lastly, next to her stood a shivering, pitiful-looking stallion. The way his pinprick eyes shifted around unnerved me, and the fact that he kept rubbing his leg made me think he was a junkie. What cheap shot ever saw in him, I'll never know. Too bad I needed every pony I could get. Hope, this is Miss Wineston of Canterlot. Cheap Shot pointed to the ghoul, who then lifted her hoof and held it to my muzzle, expectantly. She didn't even glare as she waited for me to do something. Once again, I simply waited until she lowered it. Miss Wineston, this is Hope. Charmed, I'm sure. She glanced at me out of the corner of her eye, looking me over and sizing me up. And the stallion to her left is Wormtail. Cheap Shot smiled and rubbed at his neck. We used to know each other back in the day. Yeah, and you owe me one for this. Wormtail snapped and twisted himself around. In place of a tail was just a hairless lump of flesh that jutted oddly from his rump. The scars of horrendous burns ringed out from the stump, completely obscuring where his cutie mark would be. You're damn right you owe me. Listen up, I snapped, drawing everyone's attention. I don't care who you are or who you were. You will do as I say if you want to get out of here. And just about the only ponies who didn't adopt a grimace were Cheap Shot and Mora. Is that clear? What's this plan of yours, anyway? Jackknife glared as he spoke. And how can we trust that you won't sell us out? Oh, you can trust I won't sell you out. I shot back at him. Because I need you to play your damned part. I looked over to the ragtag group of criminals. Your jobs are to get this prison riot ready. Once the riot starts, we'll be taking the armory in the confusion and blasting ourselves through the path I find for us. Not to be a naysayer, but how do you plan on achieving this? Mary Days squeaked as she face-hoofed. And do you even know where the armory is? Don't you think they built this place to withstand a riot? I don't yet know where it is, but I have some pony I trust who is receiving the building schematics. My response seemed to satisfy her. And sure, they built this place to withstand countless riots when they were fully staffed. Where's that? At most 20 of these abominations, and 200 prisoners? How the hell are we even supposed to start a riot? Jackknife asked as he rolled his eyes. It's not like the prisoners will just start attacking those things the second we tell them to. And why won't they? Cheap Shot surprised me by speaking up first. You all consider yourselves some of the most powerful ponies in the southern eastern wastelands. Don't tell me you can't sway some petty criminals or wasteland no-ponies. He chuckled and turned his smile on Miss Wineston. Or would you rather keep your hooves clean and have Hope do all the talking? Watch your tongue. Miss Wineston's eyes flared pink over their normal blue for a moment. No pony here argues that we should be the ones to convince them. She paused as she took a drag on her cigarette, letting out another poof of pink cloud into the air above us. The problem is, they aren't like the slaves back home. We might actually have to give them something in return. She visibly shuddered as she spoke. What a despicable group of ponies. I was going to hate every moment of working with them, but if the best shot. If I had to grin and bear it, so be it. A little annoyance would be all worth it whenever I finally got my hooves around that necromancer's douchebag's neck. Are you stupid? I asked, taking a step up towards her. She blinked in surprise and watched as I nearly pressed up against her muzzle with a snarl. If you want to fucking get out of here, you will promise them anything they damn well want. I looked over to the others. Even if it's to bring back their loved ones, you fucking say yes. You know, your reputation is very misleading. Mary laughed as she turned around. Maybe I misjudged you. My services are yours for the moment, she said as she walked away. The nameless pony joined by her side after giving a nod to me, and the Ash twins simply gave their short bow and turned to go. Oddly, Mora didn't glance at me again when she did. It was probably better for all of us that she didn't anyway. Not that I so much cared, past a fleeting interest. Jackknife stepped up towards me without any warning, however. I kept as still as I could and simply glared at him. You've got your riot so long as you hold up your end, he growled. Remember what I said. The second we're out of here. That's enough tension for one day, don't you think? Sheepshot said as he pressed himself between us. Let's just leave the little lady to think, shall we? He gave a devilish grin to Jackknife, who then backed off. Both Miss Winniston and Wormtail turned and left as well. A fine bunch of assholes you put together, I sighed, when I could finally convince myself to relax a bit. You think they can do it? Can you get us out of here? He cocked an eyebrow and softened his smile to a genuine one. Besides, I'm sure it won't be long before we regret ever thinking this plan up. Speak for yourself. I already regret it. I grumbled and sat down. Well, look at that. He chortled. We're already ahead of schedule then. The rest of the time spent outside was watching our new associates making the rounds through the courtyard ponies. Telling the countless other prisoners they needed a riot was the riskiest part of the plan. To keep my mind off of it, when we were ushered back inside, I spent a good chunk of time seeing what I could learn about this place without the schematics. From what I could tell, the foundations and walls were still in a near-perfect state for being over a century and a half old. The bars to most of the cells were also mostly rust-free, but there were a few that did seem to be showing their age. From the soft hum that I could hear when I put my ear to the floor, I learned a lot. This place most likely ran on some self-contained spark reactor or boiler assembly that didn't need such maintenance. No basement meant no tunnel out, which would have been possible if nobody was down there to guard it anyway. As I started to ponder out the other building, the shadow of an abomination filled the cell. He had the lower body and head of a pony, but the chest and arms of a hellhound. At first I'd wondered why he'd shown up, but he answered that question fairly quickly anyway. Out, he rasped with a scratchy voice. Gripping and pulling at the door, it slid open effortlessly for him, and he stepped outside. You and your co-conspirators are late for a meeting with the warden. I shared a worried look with Cheapshot before lining up beside him. Together we were marched over to the door out of the block. We walked down the hallway until we reached the junction for the cafeteria. We were then directed to the stairwell that led up to the upper floors. With my heart beating faster, plenty of thoughts ran through my mind. Fucking great. We had been careful in getting together. The only ponies in the group knew the whole plan. When some random pony wants to break out, the warden probably doesn't give two shits. But when ponies like Cheapshot and I want to go, that probably changes things. I just wonder how he'd found out. Was it just that he thought it was an inevitability? Or did some pony turn on us? If Jackknife wanted to screw me, this would have fucking been the best way. My legs felt like they were going to lock up as I rounded the stairwell to the second floor. My eyes stared at the still dried blood of today's experiment as it coated the floor by the door. Before I could stare too long, the abomination gave me a push, and I continued onward. We climbed up another 2 floors, finally stopping on the 4th floor. The walls and the floor, even the ceiling, seemed to sparkle from its sheer lack of dust and grime. The door to the floor opened to reveal a plush-looking brown-orange carpet. A small reception area sat at the end of the hall, and a dark wooden door closed off what must have been the warden's office. As we were corralled into the hall, 2 things happened. The first was a notification that came up in my vision about how the pip-buck had connected to a nearby terminal. The second was that the door opened and we could now see inside. To my dismay, each of the ponies that Cheapshot had found had been brought up here. They sat in a line along the back wall, bound, gagged, and blindfolded. All except one. Wormtail stood in front of the large desk at the back of the room. The warden sat in a plush-looking chair with his rear hooves raised onto the desk. The large window behind him ringed around him in a way that brought all attention to his perfectly clean coat and mane. "That's all of them," Wormtail hissed through a grin, twitching as he gave a burning glare to Cheap Shot. Of all the ponies to screw it up, and for all the reasons, it had to be this. "Like I said, she's got some pony on the outside." "Thanks for your service," the warden simply remarked, raising a spotless hoof towards the abomination. "Rex, Rolf, whatever your name is, take him down to the second floor." He smiled as he spoke the words. "What?" Wormtail frowned as the mirror opposite the warden's as the abomination grabbed at him. "But you said he'd free me." "Yes, and I am. Just not in the way you'd asked." The warden laughed. "My good friend, the doctor, he is simply there, help to free you in this troubled life." Wormtail whined and fought as the abomination both used his claws to clamp his muzzle shut and dragged him off. The only other abomination in the room turned and shut the door as they left, leaving us all in an uneasy silence. "I am so very disappointed in you, Storm." The warden shook his head softly. "I've done so much to keep you safe, to keep you alive." He sighed and looked at the ceiling in disinterest. "And here you want to go and seek out another sanctuary through some pony I don't even know?" He put his hoof on his chest and gasped. "I just can't help but feel a little hurt about that." "I'm sorry you feel that way." I frowned and kept my eyes glued to him. If he wanted to play this game, I'd play, so long as it gave Pi more time to get what I needed. But is it really time we both move on? If it helps, the pony I've got to get will probably be hurt a bit more by what I have to do than you will be. "Oh, no. That isn't what's going on here." He let out a hearty laugh before getting up from his chair. Slowly, he started to walk towards me. "See, what's wrong is you have been planning to go behind my back about it all along. If you'd just asked, then I would have gladly given you the freedom you desired." He cocked an eyebrow from behind his glasses. "However, as you saw, maybe asking was not the right move after all." "So then," I said slowly, "what happens now?" "That, my dear, is up to you." He reached up and patted me on the shoulder. When he pulled his hoof back, he looked at it and snarled. Vigorously, he started to wipe his hoof on the floor, grunting and stomping a few times before he stopped. "On second thought, I can't have you dirtying up your own punishment, now can I?" He turned to the abomination. "Take the collaborators to the yard and flog them. Don't permanently injure them, though. I need them unbroken in case this happens again." Cheap Shot nodded with a look of acceptance as I looked to him. I wanted to speak up to tell the warden not to do it. I hesitated as I looked over the other ponies who had risked their freedom for me. Each one of them sat in silent acceptance. That was the only reason I'd kept my muzzle shut. As the door to the hallway opened, a group of abominations waited. One by one, they got their hooves and filed out, guided by the abomination beside me. As Cheap Shot was let out, I turned to follow. I was instead stopped by the abomination inside the room, who shut the door to keep me from leaving. In my confusion, I tried to turn myself around, but found a blurry crimson and brown line in my face. The wood bat the doctor had used sent me sprawling to the floor. You know, it's not often I like being so crude to a prisoner. The warden spoke up as he walked closer. The bat swung down again, and I cried out as it caught me on the shoulder. But it's just so much fun sometimes. He swung down again and caught me in the stomach. Don't you agree? I could only whimper as he continued to beat me senseless. By the time he'd finished, I was blacking out from all the trauma I'd endured. Out of the one eye that I could still see from, I saw the warden's pristine white jacket streaked with lines of my own blood. He dropped the bat to the floor with a grunt and turned back to his desk. Take her to solitary. He spoke up softly between his tired panting. Make sure her friends get it twice as bad as she did. I will not have my prison become a place for this filth to grow. Chapter end. Only when things are going right can they go horribly wrong. Quests finished none. Quests started none. Levels earned none. Perks earned none.